garrison sergeant major, Mr. Stokes, who has been preparing these soldiers, leads the king and his siblings and other members of the royal family. And in the rear rank of that family, the Earl of Snowdon and the Duke of Gloucester. The scarlet tunics of the dismounted lifeguards from the Household Cavalry Regiment, leading this parade as the senior regiment of the British Army. And watched from the end, where Buckingham Palace stands by the great statue of Queen Victoria, one late sovereign watches our latest departed Queen make her way towards Westminster, the heart of the nation's constitution. One might surmise that the late Queen would most have her interest in the horses taking part after a lifetime loving anything equestrian. She made the point that the King's troop, who convey her now with their horses and their gun carriage, would keep the name her father had given of King's Troop, Royal Horse Artillery. They held that title all through her reign. And now we have a new king. At the center of the imperial state crown, there are 4 pearl earrings that hang from the arches where they cross. These are supposed to have come from Scotland and to have been worn once by Mary, Queen of Scots. and the blue sapphire in the cross at the top, supposedly taken from the ring finger of King Edward the Confessor when his coffin was translated from one part of Westminster Abbey to the other by King Henry III in the 1200s. And watching with eminent pride as their daughter passes by, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, as we remember her, and King George VI. The procession will shortly turn towards the right and pass into Horse Guards by way of Horse Guards Approach Road. For the King taking on the sovereign responsibility at the death of his mother must add a great burden to these first days of kingship. The United Kingdom flags that adorn the entire length of the Mall give way in Horse Guards to the flags of Commonwealth countries, including the other realms of which the Queen was sovereign head and sovereign, and of the Commonwealth itself, which was the heart of so much that she dedicated her reign to support. It was on this corner in 1981 that the Queen was riding to her birthday parade, trooping the colour, and someone with a starting pistol fired shots towards her. No one necessarily knew it was just a starting pistol, and it was a reminder of the courage that must sometimes be required in public life to always be at the centre of public events. But the Queen very quickly recovered her horse and with immense composure took the entire parade as Colonel-in-Chief of the regiment trooping its colour. The Queen Consort, Princess of Wales, the Countess of Wessex and Forfar, and the Duchess of Sussex leave the palace and will pass up Birdcage Walk and into Parliament Square and alight in Palace Yard outside Westminster Hall, awaiting the arrival of the cortege bringing the late Queen. Queen Elizabeth II was born on the 21st of April, 1926. And April being a bad month for weather, normally in the United Kingdom, she also used to have an official birthday in the early weeks of June. And always that was marked with the Queen's birthday parade here in Horse Guards. And as she passes through, our memories can go back to the countless times on horseback, at the side of her father, the King, or as sovereign, or in carriage in later years. She took that salute from her household division. Passing under Horse Guards Arch marks the departure from the royal grounds, and this was always the main entrance of the palaces. And those palaces bid the Queen well on this, her last public engagement. Blue sashes that members of the royal family wear, the most noble order of the Garter, in this case given to each of them by the Queen as the order's sovereign head. Procession turning left into Whitehall and towards Parliament Square. They will shortly pass the entrance to 10 Downing Street. And for the Queen's constitutional life, she appointed 14 prime ministers, inheriting one in Sir Winston Churchill, her 15th when she arrived as sovereign. The Queen unveiled this Women at War memorial with the clothes hanging on it that were worn by women helping in the war effort or fighting themselves from 1939 to 1945. Of course, in 1945, the Queen herself, as Princess Elizabeth, joined the army in the Auxiliary Territorial Force. And in that service, she provided her small part towards the defeat of the tyranny in Nazi Germany. And at the rear of this procession, the Blues and Royals, who also form part of the Household Cavalry, dismounted, bringing the rear of this procession. Last November, the Queen was unable to take part in the annual Act of Remembrance at the Cenotaph. But she had been to almost every annual remembrance, and she had stood in front of the cenotaph beside her father too, her own wartime memories merged with those of new generations, as so many of her armed forces served on operations during her reign. At its top, the cenotaph has the empty tomb for the thoughts and memories of all those families who were affected by war. The dead of wars, acknowledging in silence the sovereign whose father and grandfather led them in the First and Second World War, and so many of those who died during the Queen's reign in the Army, Navy and Air Force. Around the gun carriage, the military equerries who served the Queen from the Royal Navy, the Army and the Air Force, taking their place as pallbearers for the sovereign they served, whilst the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards march on either side of them, guarding Elizabeth II. Band of the Scots Guards, who have carried out this task today with their director of music. And the Major General commanding the Household Division, Major General Chris Geeker, whose troops, including these, the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery, are playing their part in saluting this former sovereign. The Queen's personal staff marching in a row there, the palace steward, 2 of her pages, they would have been in close attendance on the Queen day by day throughout her life. The Queen passes the statue of Sir Winston Churchill as she enters now Parliament Square. With a royal salute from the Guards of Honour, the procession will turn into that great palace yard, and we can see the massive hall of Westminster waiting to greet the late sovereign. And we'll witness as she is taken from the gun carriage and carried into the heart of that hall. Well, it is a gathering of people who have held or do hold considerable weight and power in the story of the United Kingdom. And they're gathering for the first part of the Accession Council. They're referred to generally as the Lords of the Council, who are added to by representatives of the Commonwealth and by archbishops of Canterbury and former archbishops and other appointments, including from the City of London by old tradition going back to the days of Queen Elizabeth I. And they're gathered here to witness the first part of this council. Normally, privy councils, the word privy is where the secret of it is, where private. Former Archbishop of Canterbury there and of York. And they, all of them, have held an appointment and therefore can witness the procedure that we will see. At the allotted point, the current acting Lord President of the Council, who is the Right Honourable Penny Mordaunt, I say acting, her appointment was approved by the late Queen, and she will lead the Council now.
Please make sure mobile
and other members of the royal family who are gathered.
along with Privy Councillors who are selected, the Archbishop of Canterbury and others, will sign the proclamation, ending up with the Earl Marshal and the Lord President herself. At this point there will be other business, and then the Privy Councillors who are going to go and meet the King will leave this picture gallery and head through to the throne room.
And Alistair, we're just seeing for ourselves some of the makeup of the Privy Council, just how high octane it is in terms of the politicians, all those former Prime Ministers for a start.
Former Prime Ministers, of course, and also the leaders of the opposition and the heads of the other significant parties, and also representatives from different parts of the United Kingdom, but all those who have been granted the privilege of becoming sworn as members of the Most Honourable, the Privy Council. And Privy Council rules dictate that there should be cross-party capability of people to talk about things in complete secrecy, and thereby some of the function of the most difficult moments of the national story can be done by agreement being reached outside the public forum. So that's one of the rules. But you can see there people who we regularly hear from because they currently have held, more recently, cabinet appointments or hold them right now. But just because the Queen, the late Queen, had approved the current cabinet, they haven't all been received by the monarch, and so that needs to be done shortly. Let's listen.
It's 10 o'clock, you're watching Sky News live from St James's Palace in central London, where the historic meeting of the Accession Council is just about to begin.
The business for part one of the Council. My Lords, it is my sad duty to inform you that Her Most Gracious Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, has passed away on Thursday, the 8th of September, 2022, at Balmoral Castle. I propose that, when certain necessary business has been transacted, a deputation consisting of Her Majesty, His Royal Highness, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lord Chancellor, the Archbishop of York, the Prime Minister, the Clerk of the Council, and myself shall wait on the King and inform him the Council is assembled. I now call on the Clerk of the Council to read aloud the text of the proclamation.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to His mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, the Lords spiritual and temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless his majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. God save the king.
God save the king.
I now invite those on the platform to sign the proclamation.
First to sign, the Prince of Wales. Her Majesty the Queen Consort. Signing, Camilla R. Regina, Queen. The Lord President of the Council. The First Lord of the Treasury and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. One of the great officers of state, holding an appointment that goes back into the history of time, the Archbishop of Canterbury. It will be his responsibility to crown the new king. His signature, Justin Cantuar, cross, cross. Cantuar, the Latin for Canterbury. The Archbishop of York. His signature, Stephen Ebor, cross, cross, Archbishop of York. Lord Privy Seal. Later on, the gathering of all those present will be added with their signatures to this document. All of them invited to sign as they've witnessed the announcement of the death of Queen Elizabeth II, and they are formally acknowledging that this be read out to the kingdom to confirm the new king. Finally, the Earl Marshal of England, the Duke of Norfolk, who is responsible for organising not only the state funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, but will be organising the coronation of His Majesty the King.
Drafts of 8 orders of council. 1. Ordering the proclamation to be printed and published in specialist supplements in the London, Edinburgh and Belfast Gazettes. 2. Directing the Lord Chancellor to affix the Great Seal to the proclamation proclaiming His Majesty King Charles III. 3. Directing the kings, heralds and pursuivants of arms to attend at the Court of St. James to proclaim His Majesty King Charles III. 4. Directing the Lord Mayor, the Court of Aldermen and Commons of London to attend at the Royal Exchange to proclaim His Majesty King Charles III. 5. Directing His Majesty's Secretary of State for Defence to give directions for the firing of guns at Hyde Park as soon as His Majesty is proclaimed. 6, directing the Constable of His Majesty's Tower of London to give directions for the firing of guns at the Tower of London as soon as His Majesty is proclaimed. 7, directing His Majesty's Secretary of State for Scotland to cause the proclamation for proclaiming His Majesty King Charles III to be published in Scotland. 8, directing the Clerk of the Council to issue circular letters for causing His Majesty King Charles III to be proclaimed, are hereby approved, and that concludes the business for this part of the Council. I now invite the deputation party to accompany me to wait on the King in the Council chamber.
With echoes of history, another page has been written. The Prince of Wales and the Queen Consort leading through at the short distance to the throne room, just through that door. And we will join them in a moment, and there will be other members of the Privy Council who will go with them to attend upon the new King.
Ladies and gentlemen,
and for those still here, further signatures will be given under the instructions that we're hearing being given.
Sign the proclamation which is laid out in the lower corridor as you depart. Come by this way. Thank you. The City Civic Party, I know, also have other business, so we'll want to depart at this point. I also invite any non-privy councillors to depart from the doors at the rear via the matted hall, signing the proclamation in the lower corridor as you leave. And lastly, may I invite the witnesses to the oath for upholding the security of the Church of Scotland, if you would like to move down into the throne room.
Throne room, the Earl Marshal,
As I depart, if people
with attendant representatives.
Privy councillors only, those
And one might recall quite what it must have been like for
towards the throne room.
an 18-year-old Queen Victoria to walk in to the throne room of St James's on ascending the throne, and for each monarch since her. Each of them dealing with a recognition of a personal tragedy and sadness in a family, and taking on the burden of kingship. The Earl Marshal now the last to head through to the throne room with the representatives who will be coming with him, former Prime Ministers, who will wait on the arrival of the King. Representing a broad range of parties, religion, service to the United Kingdom through Parliament in different roles. These are, after all, a representative number of the very large body of the Privy Council today, and for them they have been selected because each year there is a ballot for representatives from those parts of the Privy Council who have long since been serving in high-profile roles, but always they have cabinet members. We can see many of them amongst the group there, former leaders of different political parties, former Lord Bishop of London, Richard Charteris. The throne room is a little bit smaller than the picture gallery, and both of these rooms are very close to where the proclamation will be made of what has been read out to the Accession Council just now. And once they are all in the throne room, the King, who is likely waiting in the area between Clarence House and St James's Palace, there is a waiting room that the royal family use when preparing to come into the throne room. Many events have taken place in that throne room. Obviously, the accession councils of all recent monarchs, but also at state visits. State visitors come and receive the ambassadors to the court of St. James in front of the canopy, which is embroidered with the King's coat of arms. This is the first time women have attended the accession council. It was always an entirely male event, an evolution that perhaps also marks quite how much social change has taken place in the United Kingdom in the reign of the last Queen. The division between those Privy Councillors, the last of whom we're now seeing filtering into the throne room, and the High Commissioners who've now left and who down in the lower galleries. You can see straight through the doors there to the throne, waiting for the new king. The thing about Privy Councils is that they always exercise their business standing up, which was deemed to be a sensible way of making sure that the councils themselves didn't last too long. And they are by nature functionary. And business can therefore be dealt with quite quickly. It's a very richly decorated part of the palace with red damask walls, all in hangings, surrounded by all these amazing paintings, monarchs of the past. And the king will probably come in through the door on the left there, and out the window at the gardens of Clarence House. And you can see the plant badges of the United Kingdom on different parts of the canopy hanging down above the throne here. It will take a little bit of time before the Earl Marshal is content that everyone is ready. The Earl Marshal is holding the baton of his office and gives him the exercise of his authority, and when he's ready, the second stage of this Privy Council will take place. Very moving moment for the new king, because he will refer back to the death of his mother and how he feels. And although we heard him address the nation yesterday, this is a very intimate gathering of the most significant people in the United Kingdom. And he addresses them not only with sorrow about the death of his mother and reflecting the grief that he knows the United Kingdom holds, and also other nations, but pointing out his determination to serve the Constitution as its principal guardian on the guidance and advice of this council, principally in those members of the council who form the cabinet at any one time. King George VI, when he attended his accession council after the abdication of his elder brother, King Edward VIII, was extremely nervous at this point because he had an impediment in his speech. We know that the Prince of Wales does not, but he generally has a very emotional approach to moments of family sadness, and he clearly was dealing with that yesterday when he addressed the nation for the first time as king. The throne, you will notice, has the cipher of the late Queen. I was mentioning earlier that the College of Arms, working closely with the royal household and the King's advisors, will be designing a new cipher for the new reign. It will have CR, Charles Rex, with the Roman numeral 3, perhaps, or whatever the new king and the College of Arms decides. And it will be ensigned by a royal crown. And it will appear just as the late Queen's cipher appeared just about everywhere, on post boxes, and in England particularly, and other parts of the United Kingdom. In Scotland too, the cipher can perhaps come back. The E2R did not apply to Scotland because Elizabeth I had never reigned over Scotland, but that is different for King Charles as we wait for the arrival of His Majesty through that left-hand door, which is where the waiting room for the King is. And there's only a few doorways from Clarence House. There are routes through from different parts of the royal palaces here, which is why we haven't seen any royal arrivals publicly. The murmur of conversation between people who have been foes in Parliament, between different archbishops who have been serving at Canterbury and York over the years, all of them perhaps with their memories of their talks and meetings with the late Queen, and all recognising that this is a significant moment for the evolution of a monarchy that has woven a line through the tapestry of time for this country, back to monarchs like old King Cole, Kenneth MacAppin of Scots, and the Princes of Wales, and the old High Kings of Ireland. And in the new King are so many of those lines of descent. And in the first act that we will see the King invited to take part in, which is an oath, we will feel that history too, as he is asked to undertake to protect the independence of the Church of Scotland and its privileges. Once again, the King will come in and he will have the chance then to make his statement to those assembled Privy Councillors here. And reflect upon the Queen's reign and the loss that we all feel at her passing. So when he enters the throne room, all present will bow. The King will make his declaration, after which the Lord President will ask leave to publish the declaration of His Majesty. And then he will be asked to make the oath relating to the Church of Scotland. He will read out the oath, holding a testament in his uplifted hand, and he will sign 2 parchments as copies of that oath. And one will be kept down in the United Kingdom archive, and the other sent to Scotland, to the Court of Session, to be kept in the books of the Sederant, which are the records of the Court of Session in Scotland, and the other preserved in the Privy Council Register. A copy of the Scottish Oath will, of course, be sent later to the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. The moderator, interestingly, was preaching at Crathy Church the last weekend of the Queen's life and stayed at Balmoral Castle and spoke recently of how lively and spirited the late Queen was at that time, and when he took leave of Her Majesty on Monday, she seemed in good heart. As the council are brought to order, when the King comes in, a bow will be made and he will make his statement.
Business for Part 2 of the Council. Your Majesty, to make your declaration.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is my most sorrowful duty to announce to you the death of my beloved mother, the Queen. I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathize with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered. It is the greatest consolation to me to know of the sympathy expressed by so many to my sister and brothers, and that such overwhelming affection and support should be extended to our whole family in our loss. To all of us as a family, as to this kingdom and the wider family of nations of which it is a part, my mother gave an example of lifelong love and of selfless service. My mother's reign was unequaled in its duration, its dedication, and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to me. In taking up these responsibilities, I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set in upholding constitutional government and to seek the peace, harmony, and prosperity of the peoples of these islands and of the Commonwealth realms and territories throughout the world. In this purpose, I know that I shall be upheld by the affection and loyalty of the peoples whose sovereign I have been called upon to be, and that in the discharge of these duties, I will be guided by the counsel of their elected parliaments. In all this, I am profoundly encouraged by the constant support of my beloved wife. I take this opportunity to confirm my willingness and intention to continue the tradition of surrendering the hereditary revenues, including the Crown Estate, to my government for the benefit of all, in return for the sovereign grant, which supports my official duties as head of state and head of nation. And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me, and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
I have with humble duty to crave your Majesty's permission for the publication of your gracious speech.
Approved.
Concerning the security of the Church of Scotland.
I understand that the law requires that I should, at my accession to the Crown, take and subscribe the oath relating to the security of the Church of Scotland. I am ready to do so at this first opportunity. I, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of my other realms and territories, King, Defender of the Faith, do faithfully promise and swear that I shall inviolably maintain and preserve the settlement of the true Protestant religion as established by the laws made in Scotland in prosecution of the claim of right, and particularly by an act intituled An Act for Securing the Protestant Religion and Presbyterian Church Government, and by the acts passed in the Parliament of both kingdoms for union of the two kingdoms, together with the government, worship, discipline, rights and privileges of the Church of Scotland. So help me God.
I now invite Your Majesty to subscribe both copies of the instrument, confirming the oath has been taken.
Noting that the King is signing Charles Rex, Charles R.
I now invite the witnesses to His Majesty's oath to sign both copies of the instrument.
And for the first time, the Prince of Wales signing William P. for Princeps, which is the Latin for prince. You will note that for an order in council to be approved by the monarch, just the simple word approved makes it enacted. And the remaining business will be thus attended. In the background, while the signatures, particularly the Secretary of State for Scotland, the Right Honourable Alistair Jack, you can hear in the background the music of the Coldstream Guards as the King's Guard is forming up in Friary Court for the proclamation to be read out by Garter King of Arms later on. The First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, signing the two documents. First time, First Minister of Scotland has taken part in this significant part of the Accession Council. In the background, the private secretaries of the former Queen, the present King, former Queen's Private Secretary, will continue to serve the new King and also of the Prince of Wales.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's declaration to be made public.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council for recording the oath relating to the security of the Church of Scotland, to be transmitted to the Court of Session, to be recorded in the books of Sediment, and afterwards lodged in the State Papers of Scotland and in the Council Register.
Approved.
Draft order in Council determining the form of proclamation for proclaiming Your Majesty in the realms and in the British Overseas Territories.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising the Lord Chancellor to make use of the Great Seal for sealing all things whatsoever that pass the Great Seal until another Great Seal be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising the Lord Privy Seal, if need be, to make use of the existing Privy Seal until another Privy Seal is prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Drafts of 3 orders in Council authorising Your Majesty's principal Secretaries of State, the Lord Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, to use the existing seals until other seals be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's Secretary of State for Northern Ireland to make use of the existing Great Seal of Northern Ireland until another seal be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's First Minister of Scotland to make use of the Great Seal of Scotland until another Great Seal of Scotland be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's First Minister of Wales to make use of the existing Welsh Seal until another Welsh Seal be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising the public seals authorising the respective public seals lately in use elsewhere than in the United Kingdom to be made use of until new seals be prepared and their use duly authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council confirming Your Majesty's wishes in relation to the Sovereign Grant Act 2011 to continue the tradition of surrendering the hereditary revenues, including the Crown Estate, to your government for the benefit of all, in return for the sovereign grant, which supports your official duties as head of state and head of nation.
Approved.
Drafts of 2 proclamations. 1. Appointing the day of Her late Majesty's state funeral as a bank holiday in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. 2. Appointing the day of Her late Majesty's state funeral as a bank holiday in Scotland. And of 2 orders in Council directing the Lord Chancellor to affix the Great Seal to the proclamations.
Approved.
I now invite Your Majesty to sign both proclamations. And that, Your Majesty, concludes today's business for the Council.
With bows from all the Privy Council, the King, the Prince of Wales and the Queen Consort leave, followed by their household.
May I
And
now
whilst
invite
all
the
the business is
deputation
not done,
party and the witnesses to the oath to exit via the picture gallery and the matted hall.
Members of the Council will now take positions such as they are able, along with the King, the Queen Consort and the Prince of Wales, to witness the proclamation that will take place.
I now ask the
11
Privy
o'clock.
Councillors present to exit via the picture gallery and the matted hall and invite you to sign the proclamation, which is laid out in the lower corridor. Thank you all for attending today.
As they depart, it is interesting to notice how much attention is given to great seals and seals. All seals are the means of authority being stamped and confirmation given to any instrument or enactment. And so consequently, as they are all currently bearing reference to the late Queen, permission needs to be given for them to carry on until the new ones are made. And when the new ones are made, they will be presented to the monarch, who will be invited to deface with a hammer the old Great Seal. And this is done deliberately in order to make sure that no one could use seals because of their power in enacting law in the wrong way. But we have witnessed a remarkable moment, the confirmation by the High Council, as it were, the Privy Council of the United Kingdom, of the death of Elizabeth II and of the accession of the new King, Charles III. And shortly, with all these signatures being placed upon confirmation of the proclamation that the Accession Council has just given approval to, it will be passed to Garter King of Arms, David White, who will then, with the Heralds, Pursuivants and Kings of Arms, along with the Sergeant at Arms, which we will see, and the State Trumpeters, take their place on the balcony overlooking Friary Court at exactly 11 o'clock. And a reminder that today, although we are in the mourning process for Elizabeth II, is defined to be a day of celebration of the new King. And that's why at the moment flags are being raised across the kingdom to full mast, and they will remain at full mast until 1 hour after the last proclamation, which will be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon tomorrow. It's very normal, isn't it, that sometimes pens don't work, and this is such a significant document, and everyone will be wanting to make sure that their signature is properly made. This is a document that will go into the archive of the nation, and for those who are signing, who come from all different walks of political persuasion and interest, this is a non-political moment, a punctuation point in the national story. And just as the state does occasionally step in and order the process of the political argument and push, this is one of those moments where we stop and think about how the Constitution rests through ancient tradition upon a non-political head of state who has inherited from his mother the responsibility, and now in this long gallery where often they have laid out books of remembrance and will later on for those who will wish to sign books of condolence to the Queen.
Yes. Yes. It's just a matter of time, and I don't know if
And Alistair, as we watch, as you say, so many politicians from all sides of the House of Commons, from all political persuasions, signing the documents there, just give us your sense of the statements that the King made there. Of course, we remember the statement made by Her Majesty the Queen back in 1952, and that awareness, once again, as we heard from King Charles last night in his address to the nation, that awareness, that pledge, that vow about his duties and responsibilities.
It may seem to a modern world quite trite in an odd way, because some of the language we're hearing and some of the way in which these activities are carried out looks very formal, very dignified, very old-fashioned. And yet, what the King has undertaken to do is profound, and that is to maintain the constitutional traditions by which, as a free nation over the years, we have developed through Parliament, which is sovereign. And the strange nature of the United Kingdom is that although Charles III is the sovereign, the United Kingdom Parliament is itself what is sovereign, and the King is responsible for maintaining, on the advice of his principal ministers who form the cabinet, the Constitution as it evolves. And we can recollect recently controversial times when it has been the case that the advice given to the late Queen on certain constitutional matters were then subsequently laid before the Supreme Court and cast out. And so we are reminded with quite recent history that it is a delicate balance sometimes for monarchs, and any biography of any recent king or queen will tell you that this is no easy set of judgments, and there is great pressure upon monarchs sometimes to act correctly and formally in times when they can be put by a political desire into an uncomfortable place. So I think what we're witnessing is profound because the King has undertaken to uphold the Constitution, and we know what a tough job that can be. And he did say that in the period of grief, as he undertakes this new role, he holds for the support of the people of the United Kingdom and further afield in order to carry out this task. It's a pretty lonely place to be sometimes.
Our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills is here with me, and Rhiannon, your take on the King's declaration?
I think following his historic address to the nation last night, there was really a continuation of the themes, and I think those messages that he's been so keen to convey to the country and to the rest of the world, fully appreciating that everyone is now looking to him to lead the tributes to his late mother. He talked about how the family appreciate the overwhelming support that they are feeling from so many, He described how his mother gave an example of lifelong love and selfless service that was unequalled in her devotion, and said that even in our grief we should really look to her example. Also, again, I think a reminder of what he described as really the weight of responsibilities that now rest on his shoulders, and that has formally been confirmed today in terms of the proclamation that's now being signed by political and religious figures. John sent to me there. He talked about the great inheritance that he now takes on, the heavy responsibilities of sovereignty. And we can also see there that gun salutes are being prepared. Yesterday, of course, we had gun salutes there at the Tower of London, also at Hyde Park. And right across the United Kingdom, 96 gun salutes yesterday to mark every year of the Queen's life. And throughout her reign, those gun salutes have marked moments of celebration. Yesterday, there was an air of solemnity. Today, once again, the guns will fire. And this time in celebration of the start of a new reign. There is fanfare today. And yet I think for the new king, he was ever so keen to make sure that that does not detract from the enormity of the loss that everyone's feeling.
And Rhiannon, those gun salutes will coincide with the initial public reading of the proclamation. I wonder if we can have a look at the shot behind us here, just outside St James's Palace, where members of the public have been gathering outside, and many of them have been around Buckingham Palace for the last few hours. They've been let in that short distance to St James's Palace, and behind us there is the balcony above Friary Court. And there we can get an aerial view, a better view than we actually have, because the crowds are between us and that, as we await the reading of the proclamation, the first public reading of it. Yes, of course it has been on television, but this dates way back before the days of television or any forms of electronic communication, and the reading of the proclamation will be taking place at 11 o'clock precisely, and that will be read out by the Garter King of Arms. And as we're saying there, then Rhiannon, it cascades throughout the country, initially in central London and then beyond.
That's right, and we will see over the coming days that proclamation will be marked in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that for the first time today, this ceremony has been witnessed on television, but as we watch the crowds outside of St James's Palace now, looking across Friary Court towards that balcony, it is an echo of what would have happened 70 years ago. And today, it's worth reflecting on the fact that we are witnessing ritual and spectacle that has not been seen for so long.
And so many people wanted to be part of it. I mean, it's only certain members of the public who've been let in. There are many thousands more I can see down there being held back, who've been around Buckingham Palace, but also some of the members of the Accession Council have come out to be part of the crowd themselves. I can see just over the top of some of the other cameras around here, Chris Grayling, of course, former Transport and Justice Secretary, amongst other things. I think that's Nigel Evans, Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, and many others there mingling amongst the crowds. It really is the great and the good.
And for us, I think, to watch through those corridors, so many political figures.
Salmond as well.
And I think it was a reminder, wasn't it, of the Queen's remarkable reign and the decades that it's covered. Seeing all those familiar faces, some more recent than others when it comes to their political careers, but also to see 6 of her prime ministers there in the front row watching as the new king made that proclamation, a reminder of the longevity of her reign and now the fact that her son is taking on that responsibility.
Also a reminder, no, we don't have cameras on this, but also a reminder of the cessation, the suspension of political hostilities. Theresa May and Ian Blackford, the leader of the SNP in Westminster, having a bit of a bit of a chat there, can almost say a tender chat. You can see Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister. Oh, there's former leader of the Conservatives, former Foreign Secretary William Hague as well. And that's just a few of these politicians who, as you say, Rhiannon, have gathered out here to mingle with the crowds, to take in, and it's an overused phrase, but this really is this moment in history.
Yes, some decided to leave earlier, but I think a number of them have decided to want to stop and pause. And I think, like so many across the country, maybe spend a bit of time reflecting on their own memories of meeting the Queen. One thing that certainly will unite many of them. But what was also fascinating today was the Privy Council members that we see waiting out here now is this body that we're often reminded of how important it is to the monarch, the sovereign. They're this body of advisors. But never have we seen that gathering filmed before. We've never been able to witness it. And yet we now saw the new king actually conducting the business of state. Penny Mordaunt saying certain things, and then the new king saying approved. And that gives us a new insight into monarchy, brings it into the 21st century, and at a time when people will, I think, feel, some people bemused by the fact that this has all happened so quickly, the death of a much-loved monarch, and already we have fanfare about a new sovereign. Opening the doors, letting people in, hopefully will explain the process a bit better.
And Rhiannon, just on practical matters, we got some new information, didn't we, during the course of that process, about the funeral, that it will be a bank holiday.
Yes, so we now know that the King has approved an order declaring that we will all have a bank holiday on the day of the funeral. When is that day? We don't know at the moment, but...
Do we know when we will be told, when that will be decided?
So we're anticipating that we're going to have the first briefing in terms of what we can expect over the coming days, and potentially the date of that funeral later this afternoon. So hopefully by this evening we will know when that bank holiday is going to be, and a few more details about what is to come over the next days or so.
Well, let's rejoin Alistair Bruce, our royal commentator. And Alistair, we're, 4 or 5 minutes away from this moment in history for the first time since 1952, when we are going to hear the reading of the proclamation of a new monarch.
As you speak, the state trumpeters coming out onto the balcony here above Friary Court. And the intention of this event is to speak to a nation, a Commonwealth in mourning, and to raise the heads of that nation to celebrate that there is a new monarch. From the window onto this balcony will come the pursuivants, heralds, and kings of arms of the College of Arms. Also the sergeants at arms, the heralds wearing the tabards which show the coat of arms of the king. Kings of arms wearing white plumes on their cocked hats, and also with them will come the Earl Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk. They will spread across the balcony. And here comes the Garter King of Arms, David White, who with the Earl Marshal beside him holds the proclamation.
Can we have the trumpets?
Waiting for the moment of 11 o'clock when the guns will start to fire to mark the announcement that the King has given instruction to be read out, that the Queen has died and approved by the Privy Council. He has now been identified and confirmed as the rightful new King. From the principal palace of the monarchy here at St. James's, the principal proclamation will be made at the moment 11 o'clock strikes, and they'll be watched by the new King, by the Queen Consort, the Prince of Wales, and waiting down below, the King's Guard, Number 7 Company, 2nd Battalion Coldstream Guards, who will later present arms to celebrate the new King, and then we'll give 3 cheers to His Majesty. The principal proclamation of King Charles III.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to His mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, the Lords Spiritual and Temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III. By the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless His Majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. Given at St. James's Palace this 10th day of September in the year of our Lord, 2022.
The captain of the King's Guard will now order the troops to present arms, and the colour will be lowered. And then God save the King.
God save the King!
To a great cheer, the captain of the guard brings the troops out of the present, and they will now ground their arms, place their rifles on the ground and prepare to give 3 cheers. They kneel down, place their rifles and return. So with joy, wherever you are, if you wish, join in with 3 cheers for the new king.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip, hip! Hooray!
Captain of the King's Guard will now instruct placing of headdress, the recovery of the arms, and Garter King of Arms, the Kings of Arms, the Heralds Pursuivants of the College of Arms will then, along with the Heralds Extraordinary, leave from the balcony. And the principal proclamation of the new reign is done.
Good morning and welcome to our coverage of a historic first. The Accession Council has its origins well before the Norman conquest of 1066. It takes some explaining, which we will endeavour to do, but it is to be televised for the first time this morning, which should be fascinating. Charles III became king at the moment of his mother's passing, which also perhaps does bear some explaining in terms of its common law origins. But he has known from birth that his reign would begin both in sorrow and in public. This morning's ceremony is all about the historic need for leaders to be seen from the start. Continuity keeps the crown alive. Well, today, King Charles III will be formally recognised and proclaimed at a gathering of the most senior figures in British life, present and past. After the briefest of periods out of the public gaze in the immediate aftermath of the news of the Queen's death at Balmoral, the new monarch was back in the spotlight. And on his return to London, the King has already begun to set the tone for his own reign, stopping his car before it entered the gates of Buckingham Palace to speak to those who had come with condolences for the loss of his mother ahead of last night's moving address.
As the Queen herself did with such unswerving devotion, I too now solemnly pledge myself, throughout the remaining time God grants me, to uphold the constitutional principles at the heart of our nation. And wherever you may live in the United Kingdom, or in the realms and territories across the world, and whatever may be your background or beliefs, I shall endeavour to serve you with loyalty, respect, and love, as I have throughout my life.
In the next hour, St James's Palace, just a 5 minutes walk from Buckingham Palace, of course, will hold an accession council to do just that. Throughout the ages, it has been the setting for some of the most important events in royal history, and it remains the home of the royal court. For the very first time, our cameras have been allowed in to witness the event, which will be attended by several hundred politicians, senior members of the clergy, and other high-ranking public servants. All are members of the Privy Council, a group appointed by the monarch to advise and sign off on new law. And in the grand tradition of announcing a new monarch, at 11 o'clock, the balcony outside St James's Palace will then be filled for a royal proclamation, the first since the Queen's reign began in 1952. Well, to guide us through the events of the next 3.5 hours, I'm joined by royal historians Bob Morris and Anna Whitelock and royal author Penny Jr. We'll get their thoughts very shortly. But first, Paul Brand is at St James's Palace, where the Accession Council and first proclamation of the new king will take place. Paul, talk us through the significance of what we're about to witness.
Morning, Tom. Well, before the days of rolling news and mobile phones, this was quite literally the original news flash, the way that news would have travelled by word of mouth that we had a new monarch. It's proclaimed here at St James's Palace first, but also in Scotland, in Wales, in Northern Ireland, proclamations across the cities, the counties and the parishes of the United Kingdom. In those days, of course, it might have taken days, even weeks, for everyone to learn that there was a new monarch. Nowadays, I doubt as if there is anyone in the United Kingdom who hasn't already heard that we have a new king. But this remains an important constitutional moment, the first official recognition that the king has ascended to the throne. And for the first time ever, we won't just witness what happens here on the balcony of St James's Palace, but what happens inside too, which will be televised.
Elizabeth Alexandra Mary is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become Queen Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen of this realm.
It is the moment state formally recognises sovereign. For centuries, the gallery outside St James's Palace has trumpeted each of the nation's new monarchs.
This is looking forward to the new reign. It needs to be pronounced to the world.
The new sovereign will make a personal declaration. I mean, this is such an extraordinary historical occasion.
For the first time, we're going to hear those words, "God save the King," words that many of us have never heard before.
Few realise it, but St James's is actually the most important royal residence in the country. Just down the road from Buckingham Palace, it's largely ignored by tourists, despite being the setting for some of the most vital events in royal history.
St James's Palace was built by Henry VIII back in the 16th century, and for the next 300 years it was the home of monarchs in England. And then with Queen Victoria's reign, the royal residence moved primarily to Buckingham Palace. But this still remains officially where the royal court still is, the court of St James, and so it remains the principal ceremonial hub of the monarchy.
Today, for the first time, we've been invited in to see not just the historic ceremony outside, but the oaths and pronouncements inside these walls. In the gold-leafed reception rooms, the powerful of the past stare down from their picture frames. Eyes on the wall, about to witness a new chapter in history. Crammed in here will be the Accession Council, today's High Commissioners from the realms, as well as politicians, senior civil servants, clergy and royals on the Privy Council.
The Privy Council was established in the 13th century, and it is an advisory body to the monarch. They are there to bear witness to the fact that we have a new sovereign.
The throne that seated Queen Elizabeth II for so long will now see her son installed in her place. Here, the new king will make his declaration.
I think he will want stability, of course, for the monarchy and for our country. But I also think that he will want to reflect the changes in our country that have taken place.
The Accession Council is something that's never been seen in public before, though Queen Victoria did allow the artist Sir David Wilkie to capture hers.
The eyes of the world are watching St James's Palace in a way that's never really been seen before. The Queen's coronation way back in 1952 broke new ground in being televised for the first time. But now the events from today and the next 10 days are really going to be watched in real time globally.
Stowed carefully in a cupboard are the original proclamation documents, formalising each new monarch in writing. This is the headquarters of the country's heralds, whose job it is to maintain many of the ancient standards of British public life, like flying flags and coats of arms.
There has always been a proclamation, an accession proclamation. It is rendering public what has happened.
Clive Cheeseman is one of the officers of arms, the Richmond Herald, a steward of these scripts.
And the way it's written here, it feels momentous, doesn't it? There's a gravity to the language. I mean, this sentence, whereas it hath pleased Almighty God to call to his mercy our late sovereign, Lord King George VI, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown is solely and rightfully come to the high and mighty Princess Elizabeth Alexandra Mary.
Yes, this is a big performative utterance. It's not about mourning the old monarch, though it does a bit of that. It's looking forward to the new reign. Flags are back at full mast for the period of the proclamations, so it has a different character.
So this isn't a moment of mourning necessarily, this is actually an important constitutional moment.
Precisely.
Once the formalities inside are complete, state trumpeters and a line of heralds will process outside to the proclamation gallery to publicly announce the new king.
Expectant crowds are going to be gathered. Everybody will be jostling for position to be here and say they were here for that moment when the new king is proclaimed.
Right there from that balcony.
Indeed.
We therefore, the Lord spiritual and temporal of this realm, publish and proclaim.
It was 1936, the last time a king was proclaimed in this courtyard, when George VI came to the throne.
God save the king.
Today, in the place which proclaimed both his grandfather and his mother, a long line continues as our new king begins his reign.
Well, there are many fascinating things about this morning, not least seeing many former prime ministers. We're told that former prime ministers Blair, Brown, Johnson and Cameron have already arrived. Pretty rare to have all of them in one room. Well, there's so much to set up about this. If you're into history or the royal family of anything, this is going to be a fascinating morning because boy, does it take some explaining. And I'm joined, as I said, by Bob, Anna and Penny, who are going to help me variously with the aspects of this. Bob, can we just start at the very beginning? Where does this have its origins? Pre-Norman conquest, is that correct?
Yes, all kings, all monarchs need advice, and they need a council of some kind or another. And this has gradually been formalised over the years to the situation we are in now. So the advisory group that the Saxon kings used was called the Witan, and that had powers of recognition and also selection, of course, which existed in the times before primogeniture was settled in this country as the way in which the king was chosen. So this is a powerful body even then, and it was continued essentially in one form or another for many, many years afterwards, and was adopted also by the Normans.
So we should clear up one thing, because I said at the start, let's be clear why one monarch is automatically, on the moment of death, in all that sadness, succeeded by the other. And the Accession Council, it's not a matter of choice, as it might have been in Saxon times. That's because that's developed over, that's common law that's developed over the centuries.
Indeed, and this was something that was evolved gradually over a period of time. The French were first to settle it. The Capetian monarchy settled this in the late 10th century and had automatic succession, uncontested, until the early 14th century and the beginning, of course, of what we call the 100 Years' War, because there was a contested selection. But in this country, primogeniture wasn't really established until the late 12th century, I think one could argue. Yeah. And the law has reinforced that situation. Originally by the declaration of the judges, what we know as the common law preceded statute law, which began really in the late period of Edward I's reign in the late 13th century. And as we regard it now as the dominant form of law, but the common law exists beside it still, because what was judged by the judges as a good law remains.
Anna, if we consider its origins are pre-Norman conquest, why do we still have it 1,000 years later? How has it developed over the intervening period?
I mean, this is a big day, and in a way, to understand modern Britain and the modern monarchy, we need to understand the history. And what we're going to see today, and what we're going to hear today, really, I suppose, dates back to the 17th century, so post-Tudors, and it's a point where Britain is threatened by Catholic Europe, so we need to understand that defence of Protestantism is important, and we need to understand that this dates from a period where the constitutional wings or the authority wings of the monarch were being clipped, and so there were constraints being put in. And some people might have heard of the Act of Union in 1707, which formalised England and Scotland coming together in Great Britain, and also the Bill of Rights, which clipped the wings and established this kind of constitutional quid pro quo between the monarch and Parliament. So what we're going to see today, first of all, is the Accession Council, made up of, today there'll only be about a couple of hundred, there's in fact about 600 or 700 Privy Councillors, former Cabinet Ministers. Basically anybody who's a Privy Councillor has the title Right Honourable. And I believe there was a ballot about who could be there today. And first the Accession Council is going to agree the proclamation, and this is basically proclaiming the title of the new king. Now we know he's Charles III, but in days before, this would be where that would be determined. We will also see in that proclamation the confirmation of the fact that Charles is head of the Commonwealth. That's not a hereditary position, that wasn't a given, but in 2012 at the CHOGM, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, the Queen expressed her desire that it be Charles and no other head of state that succeeded her, so we'll hear that too. And then it will be announced, as we heard, and this is where basically in the days gone by before TV and Twitter, people would actually know that there was a new king. And from there we move on to the Privy Council when the king will arrive.
OK, Penny, a big moment for the new king. This is his first chance to actually kind of address us as king. Yesterday he was very much talking about his mother.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, how many years has she been preparing for this? This is a speech, I think, that he writes himself. It will be from the heart. He has, you know, this is going to be the best prepared monarch this country's ever had. So it'll be very, very interesting to hear what he has to say.
OK. Let's go put all that to Chris Shipp, our royal editor, who joins us from Buckingham Palace. Chris, we obviously talked last night about that address, the first time we had heard the new king addressing us as monarch. I think the consensus, the overwhelming consensus, seems to be that it was a very, very well-judged speech. But this is somewhat different, isn't it, the declaration today?
Yeah, you're right, Tom, and actually I think it would be hard for King Charles to top the speech that he made yesterday, which I think ticked every single box in terms of looking back and paying tribute to his mother, but also looking forward and articulating the kind of king that he's going to be. But you know, today is all about proclaiming and declaring that we have a new king. Of course, we all know that now. We've known that since the announcement from Buckingham Palace on a Thursday evening. But this is a significant sort of historical moment. And I think Paul was just talking about the fact we haven't had one of these. Let's just remind ourselves, we haven't had one of these since 1952, and we haven't had a king declared at one of these since 1936. And there are so many Privy Councillors, as Anna was just saying, 700 or so. They're not all going to be able to fit in that room today. But we should point out there are two parts to the Accession Council, and these are quite key. One is declaring the death of the late Queen, and one is proclaiming the arrival of a new king. And then you'll get that very old-fashioned looking announcement on the balcony of St James's Palace looking into Friary Court. I mean, just the symbolism, the history, there's so much on here. I'll just give you one little update we've had from Buckingham Palace, Tom, about what the king will be doing after all of this happens. And then he's got a series of audiences at Buckingham Palace. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the first one at 2 o'clock, the Prime Minister and members of the Cabinet, all Privy Councillors, of course. Then at 3 o'clock, he's seeing the leaders of the opposition parties. 4 o'clock, he is receiving the Dean of Westminster at Buckingham Palace. A lot for the king to do on this very important day.
Well, Chris, thank you very much. A reminder there really of how the job crowds in immediately, a man mourning his mother, but you know, there is no escape from the fact that he is king, and there is an enormous amount of work to do with immediate effect. Well, let's not take our eye off why today's event is happening. The Queen's body remains in Balmoral, where she passed away. Our correspondent Emma Murphy is there for us. Emma, perhaps you could take us through what's happening there and what's going to happen.
Yes, so
here at Balmoral, some of the senior royals remain in place. We understand that the Princess Royal, Princess Anne and her children are here. The Duke of York, Prince Andrew, as well as his children, Beatrice and Eugenie, and also the Wessexes. Now, they are here in the palace where the Queen's coffin lies at rest. We understand that it is believed to be in the ballroom, a place where, as a younger woman, the Queen would have danced. As an older woman, she hosted many, many receptions. And during the course of today, we expect that they will open the palace doors so that members of staff who have worked here most of their lives will be able to come and pay their respects to the woman who was such a very significant part of their lives. Bear in mind that in this community, many people have worked here for generations of their families. And so there is a really close tie. And that's why the royal family felt it was so important that the doors were opened for these people to come to really have a moment to reflect on what the Queen has meant to them and how she has affected their lives over the years. Now, you can probably see behind me, we also have an awful lot of well-wishers coming from the local community. They've been coming here since the announcement was made, laying flowers, leaving messages, and just taking time to stop and think. I think it would be unsurprising if we didn't see any members of the royal family coming out to read these messages at some point in the coming days, just to take solace from the messages and the words that have been left for them.
OK, Emma, thank you very much indeed. Well, today's proclamation is the first of a series of similar ceremonies that begin in London but ripple out across the UK and to all the 14 other realms in which Charles is now king. Many of us think of Buckingham Palace as the centre of royal power, but the home of the royal court is just along the Mall at St James's Palace. That's where the Accession Council will begin at 10 o'clock. Once it's completed, the principal proclamation will take place at 11 o'clock on the balcony overlooking Friary Court immediately outside. That's the first of today's proclamations. A second is due in the City of London to the east. That will take place at midday outside the Royal Exchange, which is next to the Bank of England. Tomorrow, there will be more proclamations with the Royal Heralds dispersing to the other 3 nations in the UK. We'll bring you live coverage of the events in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Speaking of the Bank of England, news today that the Monetary Policy Committee even has been postponed next week as a sign of respecting national mourning. Now, Rebecca Barry is at the site of today's second proclamation, a few miles east at the Royal Exchange in the City of London. Rebecca, perhaps you could talk us through what part the City of London plays and what we're expecting to see.
Yeah, well, as you can see, they are busily preparing here for a theatrical moment of real-life significance. The police are searching with sniffer dogs. The barriers are going up in readiness for the crowds here. Anyone who comes here today will be a first-hand witness to a spectacle that hasn't been seen for 7 decades. The processions that pass by here will be full of fanfare. There'll be the sound of drums and trumpeters, a carefully choreographed display. First, we'll see a ceremonial unit dressed in 17th century costume carrying swords and 12-foot pikes. Then we'll see a procession of officials, including the Lord Mayor of London, who will make their way here from Mansion House. They'll be joined by the heralds who will have made their way from St James's Palace, and they'll pass along here, past the crowds of people and up to the Royal Exchange, where that second proclamation will be made. But the crowds here will not just be witnessing a brilliant display of British pageantry. This is all about getting the word out. It's designed to be seen and heard, the message that King Charles III is our new and rightful king.
OK, Rebecca, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's move on to speak now to Chloe Keeley, who is at Green Park for us in the shadows of Buckingham Palace. Chloe, the crowds and the flowers do look to us as if they're really building up there now.
Yes, that's right. Where I'm standing now, Tom, is just a couple of minutes walk from the palace. This rather peaceful corner of Green Park is where people are now being asked to come and leave their flowers. So all the way through yesterday, we saw people going up to the gates of Buckingham Palace and laying their flowers there. Well, overnight, they have all been moved here to Green Park, and they've actually been arranged into little islands so that people coming here can take their time to walk between them and look at the tributes and read the messages. And one thing that's really struck me this morning is just how many families are here today. People with young children. One dad I spoke to said that his sons have been learning about this in school over the past couple of days and seeing it on the news, and he wanted to bring them here to see it for themselves and to pay their tributes as a family. Well, one family who's travelled a long way to be here is standing right next to me. This is Vicky and Tim, and you've come with your 2-year-old sons. Where have you travelled down from today?
We travelled from East Yorkshire.
So what time did you get up to be here?
We got up at 4 a.m. this morning to leave.
And what made you feel you wanted to come down here?
I think for the boys, you know, you can't avoid, it's on the news, it's in the newspapers. Even at their age, they understand somewhat of what's happening. And we just thought we had the opportunity to come down and just be a part of the, you know, of what's happening at the moment.
And Tim, can I just ask you, what did the Queen mean to you and your family?
It was just something. She was always there in our lives. You know, you look around on money and coins and stuff. She's always there. She's always been like the establishment of the country. She's always, you know, been there.
Yeah. See your boys. Have you laid some flowers already?
Yeah, they've laid some flowers this morning. Did you put your flowers down?
What did you lay down?
Did you lay some pink flowers?
No.
What colour did you lay?
Did you lay some flowers for the Queen?
No, pink.
And you're
pink ones.
You're going to stay for the day?
Yeah, we're going to stay for the day. It's important to us that we sort of see what's happening and be a part of it.
Well, and I can say that just over the past couple of hours, the number of people here and the number of flowers has just kept growing. So I think that by the end of today, this corner of Green Park will look pretty extraordinary.
OK, Chloe, thank you very much indeed. Well, we've got our first pictures here from inside St James's Palace. And, you know, we said this is a historic first, but, you know, this is quite something. You can see James Cleverly, the new Foreign Secretary, just on the left of the picture there. There's David Cameron. Look, that's an extraordinary shot of the former Prime Ministers. John Major on the right of your screen, Theresa May, David Cameron, Boris Johnson, of course, Gordon Brown, Keir Starmer, I think, just to the left of him, on the left of the screen there. So unusual to really see these. I mean, you know, Bob, Anna and Penny, just chip in where you want here, but this is something we just don't see very often, is it really?
Yeah, I mean, one person we haven't mentioned yet, it's a big day for Penny Mordaunt, who's actually Lord President of the Council, newly Leader of the Commons, and she is going to have the main role here, chairing the Council and reading the proclamation, or actually asking a senior civil servant, clerk of the council, to read the proclamation. And she will then also lead us through this first part. She will then order guns to be fired at the Tower of London and Hyde Park, and then make the arrangements and order that the proclamation is read out through the city and in Belfast, Cardiff and Edinburgh. So it's a really big day for her. We should also say, of course, that members of the royal family will be there, Camilla, William, and traditionally, those who gathered would be there in quite formal dress with decorations and so on. So they're relatively dressed down here. And yeah, look, everybody's very expectant for the arrival of Penny Mordaunt and Lord President.
Well, look, I mean, this is everyone who used to run Britain and everyone who does run Britain all in one room. I'm not sure, can't remember whether I've ever seen a sort of shot like this. I mean, just for the sheer fascination of watching all these prime ministers, of course, those three Tories on the right there, Boris Johnson, David Cameron, Theresa May, agonising small talk, you'd think, given that they have absolutely nothing in common and don't particularly like each other. But, you know, this is, I mean, Bob, see, the point of this, historically, is that this was a way of everyone who was meaningful in the country saying that they supported the new king or queen.
Absolutely, and to recognise the succession. Also not mentioned, there are also present in the group here some senior judges. And one has to remember the Privy Council still has a judicial committee which dispenses justice, including in some of the realms.
That's an important point too, to say, of course, the judiciary is independent, and whilst the cabinet will then have to swear an oath to the new monarch, the senior judges won't. It's also true to say that this is, of course, an occasion significant for those 14 other countries where our king is now head of state. And
these are moments we're not going to forget. This is, Gordon Brown apparently laughing and joking with Boris Johnson on the left. I mean, things you probably thought you would never see. We've seen various other kind of... Michael Howard we saw at the back just a moment ago, chatting animatedly. We've seen virtually every other member of the cabinet. I mean, perhaps we should explain, how does one become a member of the Privy Council, and thus why are all these people gathered in this room?
Yes, well, it's something that happens automatically for the senior cabinet members, the Secretaries of State and others, of course the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Lord Chancellor, and it's sometimes awarded to senior backbenchers as a recognition of their service. You remain a member, which is partly the problem that they have almost 700, as Anna mentioned. And so there's had to be a ballot, I think, as well as some fierce selection.
Right. Why is the Prime Minister not there?
Well, I imagine the Prime Minister is about to arrive.
Prime Minister will
the
Prime Minister will arrive. And also the High Commissioners of those other countries, the realms, have been invited. Not all of them may well be there. But they will, and here is the beginning of the occasion. And this has been going on for centuries, but there's the Archbishop of Canterbury, there's the Prime Minister. It's the first time it's been televised. The Queen broke ground, of course, having her coronation televised, and here the new King also breaking ground. And there is, big day, Lord President of the Council, Penny Mordaunt, followed by the Queen Consort.
And the Royal Dukes.
And the new Prince of Wales, of course, who's just, been given the title.
He doesn't attend this part, he attends the next part. And in the next part, it is only Privy Councillors who attend.
The business for part one of the Council. My Lords, it is my sad duty to inform you that Her Most Gracious Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, has passed away on Thursday, the 8th of September, 2022, at Balmoral Castle. I propose that, when certain necessary business has been transacted, a deputation consisting of Her Majesty, His Royal Highness, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lord Chancellor, the Archbishop of York, the Prime Minister, the Clerk of the Council, and myself, shall wait on the King and inform him the Council is assembled. I now call on the Clerk of the Council to read aloud the text of the proclamation.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to His mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, the Lords spiritual and temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless His Majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. God save the King!
God save the King!
Well, there we are. The first time we have
I
ever
now
been
invite
allowed
those
as a
on the
nation to witness
platform
that.
to
Sorry, let's just
sign
hear what
the
Penny Morton has to
proclamation.
say further. So she was just inviting the members of the council to sign. The Prince of Wales, the new Prince of Wales, Prince William, is signing first. We expect the Queen Consort to sign second, followed by the other members. Now, the platform party, key members of, I don't know what you would, I mean, would you call it the establishment? I don't quite know what the correct term is, but some of the most people in key figures in the country, the Archbishop of Canterbury, of course, you probably recognise, the Archbishop of York, but also the Lord Great Chamberlain, head of the royal household, not a figure well known, but actually has proved a very powerful position at points in the last 10 years, responsible for the running of the royal household. So we're just going to witness the members of the platform party, the Prime Minister, of course, stepping up to sign now.
Just to be clear, I mean, this is a document that will be read by historians for years. I often go to the archives and look back on old proclamations with signatures faded at the bottom. And this is a new document being made, cast in that image. It's really quite incredible to see.
So how much does it vary?
It's very standard. What the Lord President there declared, the words, and then the proclamation, very, very standard words. They probably sounded a bit odd to people. The reference to Lord Spiritual and Temporal, that's basically the church and the state. And there we have the Archbishop of Canterbury. And also the important role for members of the City of London, the Lord Mayor and the Aldermen who run the city. So this was the old chief ministers, government officials or chief members of the establishment, as you say here, signing. And after this, the Lord President will order that the proclamation is read out across London and then across the capitals of the other nations. And it will be a kind of the start of a verbal beacon, if you like, a lighting of beacons to proclaim proclaim the passing of the Queen and the accession of the new King.
The television had one interesting effect. It's a much more orderly procedure than it has been in the past, where the Lord President has had to call for quiet and so on and so forth. And as Anna was saying, I mean, the most senior official representatives sign first. All the members present also sign at but a rather later time of the day. So at one point, everybody scrambled to sign the wordings of the proclamation, which was, of course, settled by the cabinet first before it appeared here. The earliest version I've seen, Anna may have seen earlier ones, is 1625, and the wording is almost exactly the same.
Okay, well, Penny Morton, you may recognise from the Tory Leadership Challenge, who is Leader of the House of Commons, which is why she's in this position, is going to speak again here.
1. Ordering the proclamation to be printed and published in specialist supplements in the London, Edinburgh and Belfast Gazettes. 2. Directing the Lord Chancellor to affix the Great Seal to the proclamation proclaiming His Majesty King Charles III. 3. Directing the kings, heralds and pursuivants of arms to attend at the Court of St. James to proclaim His Majesty King Charles III. 4. Directing the Lord Mayor, the Court of Aldermen and Commons of London to attend at the Royal Exchange to proclaim His Majesty King Charles III. 5. Directing His Majesty's Secretary of State for Defence to give directions for the firing of guns at Hyde Park as soon as His Majesty is proclaimed. 6. Directing the Constable of His Majesty's Tower of London to give directions for the firing of guns at the Tower of London as soon as His Majesty is proclaimed. 7. Directing His Majesty's Secretary of State for Scotland to cause the proclamation for proclaiming His Majesty King Charles III, to be published in Scotland. 8. Directing the Clerk of the Council to issue circular letters for causing His Majesty King Charles III to be proclaimed are hereby approved, and that concludes the business for this part of the Council. I now invite the deputation party to accompany me to wait on the King in the Council chamber.
Bob, just talk us through the next stage that we're going to witness here.
Well, the King, the Privy Council meeting will now turn into Privy Council par excellence, as it were. It's the first meeting that the King, of course, will preside at. He will make a personal declaration, which is usually quite affecting. It normally has 3 parts. Regretted, of course, the departure of his mother. Secondly, a ringing declaration of fidelity to the Constitution. And thirdly, a humble request for the assistance of everyone in the nation as he carries out his difficult duties. It can be quite an affecting speech, and it will reinforce some of the remarks he was making yesterday in his speech to the nation.
So there we are, a remarkable shot. The Speaker of the House of Commons, if you're looking along that line there, former Tory Prime Minister John Major, of course, former Tory Prime Minister Theresa May, former Tory Prime Minister David Cameron, former Tory Prime Minister Boris Johnson, former Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown, and my eyes beginning to fail me on the left of screen, but somewhere on the left of screen, Tony Blair, and of course the current leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer. Very, very unusual, not unique, but unusual to see them all gathered in the same room, so close together. The purpose here to give their approval, acclamation to the new King, King Charles III.
And their work now is done because the Privy Council is made up of the Cabinet. So these people will file out. We'll also have glimpsed, as Jacob Rees-Mogg, who was until the new government was established, Lord President of the Council, so would have been playing this role. We also glimpsed Nicola Sturgeon. So these people will file out, and it will be now the first Privy Council, as Bob said. And of course, the Privy Council meets every month with the monarch to advise. And again, it's this age-old body, the Privy Council, and that marks the sort of formal beginning of the reign. And after the personal declaration that Bob mentioned, we're going to see an oath to uphold the independence of the Church of Scotland, which was a promise made when the Act of Union was being formed, that the King would protect the independence of the Protestant Church.
Okay, you just saw Yvette Cooper, Ian Duncan Smith, Jacob Rees-Mogg just going out of frame there. You will recognise many of these people from public life. Nick Clegg, of course, the former Deputy Prime Minister, and now works for Meta. Haven't seen him in public for a while. Robert Jenrick just behind him. So you can see Ben Wallace just at the back of frame, the current Defence Secretary. So pretty much everyone you've known and loved or otherwise in British public life of the last 20, 30 years in this room to witness, to acclaim the new King. Quite remarkable scenes, the first time we've ever seen them on television. And just really, really intriguing. Penny, can I just bring you in here? What does King Charles himself, do you think, make of all this sort of ancient tradition?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, to see this with the language that goes back centuries, and yet we're living in a world where news is round the world within an instant, with Twitter and Facebook and all these things. It's such a sort of, such a contrast.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I think the King is very much a traditionalist. I mean, I don't think he uses a computer. And I think he absolutely believes in all this pomp and ceremony. I think he thinks it's an important part of the monarchy and the job that he does.
And Anna, is it? I mean, does this actually serve a purpose in your view? I mean, if you're an American watching this, or Angela Rayner, just the deputy leader of the Labour Party, just going through it, but if you're an American watching all of this, or from France, you're here watching the former Tory leader William Hague just shuffle through frame, all these people who've dominated public life in one room. People in other democracies must think, well, this is just curious beyond curious. But does it serve a purpose, do you think?
Well, for some, I mean, it explains where we are now and why Britain runs as it does and why we have a constitutional monarchy and where it comes from. Now, for some people, this will be exactly the reason why we need to move on and change things. Because, of course, the King is going to swear to uphold the independence of the Church of Scotland. That really isn't necessary anymore. There's been a Church of Scotland Act. There's also, by the European Human Rights Convention, he couldn't just override that. He also still has to, by the Bill of Rights and subsequent acts, to exceed the English throne, he has to be a Protestant. So in a sense, this is about turning his back in terms of promise on other faiths, when of course that goes against actually what Charles is all about, which is about being a supporter of multi-faith. So it jars in a way. But I mean, this is kind of, as a historian, certainly, it's kind of tingle time.
As a lifelong history enthusiast, this is just quite something to witness. Bob, where are we now? We're at the heart of St James's Palace, this ancient royal palace.
Right, they're now got into the throne room, only the Privy Councillors. It's a ceremony of affirmation and of recognition, and it binds the parts of our constitution together in one particular and symbolic occasion, where the king is the centre of attention, but in a regime where really, we are, as much as anything, a republic who happens to have an hereditary head of state, and that gives us some advantages in the way in which the country can run.
We're also going to see the beginning of the sort of transition. So after he's made his personal declaration, he will also say that the offices of state, the seal, which can continue of the late Queen until new seals, which sign and make law formalised by Act of Parliament, those can continue. And what we'll also hear is arrangements for the lying of state and the funeral. This is still, this is him waiting for the king to come.
Sorry, having spent a great deal of my life covering politics, this is one of those moments where you just wish you had a sort of boom microphone so you could hear what Tony Blair and Keir Starmer, who've just been chatting animatedly on the left of screen, are saying to each other here. Not to mention, as I said, the various Tory prime ministers who have absolutely no time for each other, how they're making small talk. It's a bit like when the opening of the House of Commons and the leader of the opposition and the prime minister make this procession together, and you just think, oh, the small talk must be agonising, really. But can I just clear up one point? We talked about common law. Common law, I know this is my grotesque oversimplification, but it's kind of custom and practice that's built up over the years, and that's why we pass automatically from one monarch to another. But of course, we famously, 100 years before the French, had a very dramatic revolution. We tried the king not far from here. We executed Charles's namesake. We had a republic, not very happily, one might argue, for quite a few years. Was essentially the act of oblivion when the monarchy was restored. It just struck all that out in terms of how the process works.
It struck all out, except what had been approved by Charles I. And he'd approved quite a lot, actually. He'd approved the legislation which effectively ended the feudal system, for example, land tenure and so on. And so it wasn't the sort of rubbing out that the Cavalier Parliament might have entirely liked. But of course there was the decision to pursue 50 people as traitors, and they were overwhelmingly the people who signed the warrant for the death of Charles I in 1649. But it's a healing occasion also. We talk about, we can see this as politicians of different sides speaking together and so on and so forth. It's a manifestation of the nation, and at a time of change.
I sometimes think, when I wander around Westminster, of the utter high drama of those years, family against family, the nation split in half, having to design this whole new concept of the sovereignty of the people effectively in order to try the king in the first place. And I know we talked about this yesterday, but as we look at kind of these politicians, chatting to each other, is part of the reason why, we don't sort of like to think of a republic very often, because somewhere in the dim, distant recorded memory we tried it and we think it's a bit of a disaster, or do you think that plays no part whatsoever anymore?
We have a bit of amnesia, or when we come to our history about the republic, we don't really think about it. There's a statue, of course, of Cromwell outside Parliament, but it's not really talked about. I mean, we did, kill our king ahead of many, many other countries, and we do feel a little bit queasy about it. But I mean, looking at this, I'm also struck by the fact, what a week this has been. It was only on Monday that the new leader of the Conservative Party, new Prime Minister, was then appointed by the late Queen. And, within a matter of days, we now have a new monarch. This is a moment, a seminal moment in history, and it may be in decades' time people look back and see this as the beginning of the end of monarchy, or they might see this being its rebirth for the 21st century in a different form, which we're not yet clear about. But the chit-chat, the small talk goes on here.
Well, Keir Starmer making some animated points to his predecessor, although I think, considerably more interested to hear perhaps what small talk Gordon Brown and Boris Johnson are making there. Two politicians you would think did not have a great deal in common. Penny, we're waiting for the new king to come in here. We've discussed the declaration, chants for him. You know him as well as any commentator. You've written some of the seminal books on him. Any thoughts as to how he's going to be thinking at this point? Any clues as to what you reckon might be in this declaration?
Well, I suppose the matter of faith is one that this might be the moment to declare. He's famously let it be known that he would ideally be a defender of faith, of all faiths, rather than just the Church of England. And throughout the years, he has been bringing people of different faiths together. I think he's a very cohesive sort of man. I think he's going to be the most interesting king, actually. Having spent all of these years gaining the knowledge that he has, the understanding all these things, he's had time. You've got a new Prime Minister coming in, and she's suddenly bounced into absolutely everything all at once. The economy, the cost of living, everything. And now she's got this to deal with. But this is something that he has been thinking about, one imagines, for decades.
The personal declaration, though, this isn't like a big speech that he's had to kind of come up with that was perhaps more what yesterday was about. This is pretty well structured. Regret at the passing of the late Queen. As Bob said earlier, a promise to kind of uphold constitutional government, to ask for support in doing that. So, and then a little bit, perhaps, which will indicate what's fundamental to his kingship. And I think Penny's right that it will be very much about faith. History is awkward sometimes. We're going to see the new king coming in just a second, and Penny mentioned Defender of Faith. Of course, the awkwardness is that was a title given to Henry VIII by the Pope, in fact.
Okay, here we go. This is the moment the Prime Minister's come in. We're waiting now for the new king.
Business for part 2 of the Council. Your Majesty, to make your declaration.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is my most sorrowful duty to announce to you the death of my beloved mother, the Queen. I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathize with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered. It is the greatest consolation to me to know of the sympathy expressed by so many to my sister and brothers, and that such overwhelming affection and support should be extended to our whole family in our loss. To all of us as a family, as to this kingdom and the wider family of nations of which it is a part, my mother gave an example of lifelong love and of selfless service. My mother's reign was unequaled in its duration, its dedication, and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to me. In taking up these responsibilities, I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set in upholding constitutional government and to seek the peace, harmony, and prosperity of the peoples of these islands and of the Commonwealth realms and territories throughout the world. In this purpose, I know that I shall be upheld by the affection and loyalty of the peoples whose sovereign I have been called upon to be, and that in the discharge of these duties, I will be guided by the counsel of their elected parliaments. In all this, I am profoundly encouraged by the constant support of my beloved wife. I take this opportunity to confirm my willingness and intention to continue the tradition of surrendering the hereditary revenues, including the Crown Estate, to my government for the benefit of all, in return for the sovereign grant, which supports my official duties as head of state and head of nation. And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me, and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
I have with humble duty to crave your Majesty's permission for the publication of your gracious speech.
Approved.
Concerning the security of the Church of Scotland.
I understand that the law requires that I should, at my accession to the Crown, take and subscribe the oath relating to the security of the Church of Scotland. I am ready to do so at this first opportunity. I, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of my other realms and territories, King, Defender of the Faith, do faithfully promise and swear that I shall inviolably maintain and preserve the settlement of the true Protestant religion as established by the laws made in Scotland in prosecution of the claim of right, and particularly by an act intituled An Act for Securing the Protestant Religion and Presbyterian Church Government, and by the acts passed in the Parliament of both kingdoms for union of the two kingdoms, together with the government, worship, discipline, rights and privileges of the Church of Scotland. So help me God.
I now invite Your Majesty to subscribe both copies of the instrument, confirming the oath has been taken. I now invite the witnesses to His Majesty's oath to sign both copies of the instrument.
We're witnessing the signing ceremony here. Brandon Lewis, the Lord Chancellor, signing. We've just seen the Queen Consort and the new Prince of Wales signing. Penny and I both noting in the studio here that William was left-handed, which, I mean, small trivial moments. Did you know, you wrote a book about him, Penny? Did you know he was left-handed?
I wrote it. I might have done.
Yeah.
Significant to reflect here on the importance of Scotland and the presence
well, yes, I was
of
just going to
Scotland
say, can
in
you
all
just
this.
remind us of the importance of the oath to respect the security of the Church of Scotland and, of course, you know, Scottish English, well, there's Nicola Sturgeon stepping up, so it's a good moment to talk about it.
Indeed, I mean, there's a separation of church and state in Scotland. Of course, the King is obviously King of Scotland, but important to therefore recognise the independence of the Protestant Church. I mean, these are, you know, historical but very sort of resonant moments here. Nicola Sturgeon recognising that the King has acknowledged the independence of the Scottish Church. Not quite enough for her, of course. She would like recognition coming down the line of recognition of independence entirely. But yes, I mean, the relationship, of course, that we're still thinking about between England and Scotland, you know, dates back, well, 1603, when the King of Scotland came to England, James VI, and then first, and then, of course, the Act of Union of 1707.
But the Act, of course, was a result of a negotiation. And an important part of the negotiation, as Anna's saying, is the fact that the Scots wanted the independence of their particular form of Presbyterian Protestantism to be upheld. The King himself, of course, has to be a member of the Church of England.
Still even to this day, rather a controversial negotiation, one might say. But anyway.
Indeed.
Yes.
And a very hard-fought one. It's a very interesting way of doing it.
OK.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's declaration to be made public.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council for recording the oath relating to the security of the Church of Scotland, to be transmitted to the Court of Session, to be recorded in the books of Sederant, and afterwards lodged in the State Papers of Scotland and in the Council Register.
Approved.
Draft order in Council determining the form of proclamation for proclaiming Your Majesty in the realms and in the British Overseas Territories.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising the Lord Chancellor to make use of the Great Seal for sealing all things whatsoever that pass the Great Seal until another Great Seal be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising the Lord Privy Seal, if need be, to make use of the existing Privy Seal until another Privy Seal is prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Drafts of 3 orders in Council authorising Your Majesty's principal Secretaries of State, the Lord Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, to use the existing seals until other seals be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's Secretary of State for Northern Ireland to make use of the existing Great Seal of Northern Ireland until another seal be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's First Minister of Scotland to make use of the Great Seal of Scotland until another Great Seal of Scotland be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's First Minister of Wales to make use of the existing Welsh seal until another Welsh seal be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising the public seals authorising the respective public seals lately in use elsewhere than in the United Kingdom to be made use of until new seals be prepared and their use duly authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council confirming Your Majesty's wishes in relation to the Sovereign Grant Act 2011 to continue the tradition of surrendering the hereditary revenues, including the Crown Estate, to your government for the benefit of all, in return for the sovereign grant, which supports your official duties as head of state and head of nation.
Approved.
Drafts of 2 proclamations. 1. Appointing the day of Her late Majesty's state funeral as a bank holiday in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. 2. Appointing the day of Her late Majesty's state funeral as a bank holiday in Scotland. And of 2 orders in Council directing the Lord Chancellor to affix the Great Seal to the proclamations.
Approved.
I now invite Your Majesty to sign both proclamations. And that, Your Majesty, concludes today's business for the Council.
Well, there we have it. There is so much to discuss there. The new king. Must be quite a strange moment when you sign a document thinking that for hundreds of years. Let's just hear sort of finally what the President has to say.
And the matted hall.
Okay, that was just asking people to leave. So, yes, I was just saying, you know, signing a document as king, knowing that for hundreds of years people will be pulling this document out, and looking at your signature, you had the new Prince of Wales, Prince William, with a first-hand view. An heir doesn't always get that as to what all this is about.
And invite you to sign the proclamation, which is laid out in the lower corridor. Thank you all for attending today.
Penny Mordaunt, the Leader of the House of Commons, fulfilling her duties now, and all of the Privy Councillors, as we've been discussing, the great and good of politics past and present. Alex Salmond, you can see in the middle of the frame there. We've seen Nicola Sturgeon sign the document. We've seen all the living former Prime Ministers in the front row chatting with each other. You will have seen many, many people you recognise from the politics of the last 30 years, not to mention various other judges. There's James Cleverly on the right there, beginning to file out, our new Foreign Secretary. William Hague just on the very left of frame, bobbing in and out. Chris Grayling, I think, in the middle there, very tall. It really was quite a remarkable thing to witness. I'm not sure Nicola Sturgeon, there we see in the side corridor that Anna was, you know, just talking about the complicated relationship between, I mean, as the historians here, is there anything about what we just witnessed that surprised you or you weren't expecting or was slightly different?
Well, I think one of the things to notice is how they, in all the language about the new king, there was an emphasis placed on his role as head of the nation. I think that's new in its emphasis, and something that has developed in recent years in the way in which the monarch is regarded, certainly by officials and the government. There's also an absence of something there. There's no longer an order about royal prayers, because that was eradicated by the 1974 piece of legislation which conferred greater autonomy on the Church of England in liturgical and related matters.
It's also important to note that, you know, obviously women are there. The new king referred to the ladies gathered as well as gentlemen. That wouldn't have always been the case. It would have been entirely male preserve before. So that's a signal of the change of women playing a part in public life over the last few decades.
Yes, and as you commented, Tom, I mean, the dress is much less formal than it used to be. I mean, Harold Macmillan had to wear court dress, which he hired from a firm of theatrical costumiers.
Good Lord, is that the case? Well, is Ian Blackford signing now? Just Andrea Leadsom just waiting her turn. We just saw Kwasi Kwarteng, the new Chancellor, signing. Ed Miliband is just, former leader of the Labour Party, is just waiting behind there next to Angela Rayner. It's James Cleverly again coming down the stairs. So it's just one after another. The key politicians of this country, you know, I guess what they're saying is, you know, we accept, we support, we affirm that we have a new king. Penny, just as we're watching Ed Miliband sign here, I mean, it was really noticeable to me that once again it's hard not to find this endearing, right, that he keeps referring to his darling wife and references her at every point, making it clear this is a joint project. He relies on her support. I thought that was intriguing that he referred to her again here.
Yes, no, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, you know, I've always thought that you know, Charles himself is not the most confident of men. He had a difficult upbringing. He you know, didn't feel particularly treasured by his parents at times when he was a child. They weren't always there. For whatever reason, he didn't have that sort of bedrock of confidence that comes, I think, from being totally loved and feeling secure. And I think that throughout his life, he's gone from one. I mean, throughout his marriage to Diana, he had no support there from her. He's a man who I think has desperately needed someone to. He's a sensitive man. He needs strength from someone else.
Some people might have seen him actually mutter under his breath when he'd finished reading the Declaration. He sort of went, "Am I done?" And there's a sense that this is not without effort. And I think we saw that last night in the close-ups. I mean, his eyes were filled with tears. This is a strain, isn't it?
Cool. Chris has been watching all this with us. Well, not with us, but not in the studio, but he has been watching. Chris, can I just bring you in here? I mean, what have you made of what you've seen this morning?
Tom, where do you begin with what we've just witnessed? It is not often that we see that kind of thing happen and paying such great attention to every small detail of a meeting of this kind. And also a reminder of quite how many Privy Councillors there are. Just look at those pictures there. If the new king were ever to be in need of advice, he's not short of it, is he? There's more than 700 Privy Councillors where he'd need to call on them. A couple of things I will remark on. I completely agree with what you've just been discussing in the studio about the reference to his darling wife Camilla, and I refer back to that masterstroke of the late Queen on Accession Day, or perhaps we should now refer to it as the former Accession Day, on the 6th of February earlier this year, when she said that she wanted her daughter-in-law to be the Queen Consort. It's kind of smoothed everything, and as you just said, it means that this will be a reign of two people, a reign of Charles and of Camilla as well. And as ever, there was plenty of symbolism there. We've been told by a royal source that the ink pot on the table was a gift from Princes William and Harry, and that was chosen by the King for that very, very special moment. And interesting as well, Tom, to see, I think that's the first time we've seen the King, the Queen Consort, and the heir to the throne, the newly entitled Prince of Wales, all together in the throne room there at St James's Palace. So, I mean, wow, quite a meeting, wasn't it?
It really was quite a meeting, actually. I don't know what I expected from this morning, but I have to say I think all of us in the studio here were completely spellbound, as we've just seen David Cameron walking down the stairs. We're now watching former Prime Minister, very recently former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, of course, was one of the last people, the relatively small group of people, the last people to see the Queen alive before she incredibly sadly, passed when he went up to indicate that he was relinquishing the office of Prime Minister, and just before she asked Liz Truss to become her new and last Prime Minister, Ian Duncan Smith, the former leader of the Tory party, signing there, Gordon Brown, just a former Prime Minister, just waiting behind him, Yvette Cooper just behind former Prime Minister Brown. Chris, can I just ask you one other thing that really struck me from the speech? It's the second time that in 24 hours that the new king has referred to what remains of my life. And now, on one level, that's totally unsurprising and just honest and sort of shows a degree of humility that he is in his 70s. But it just surprised me a bit. Did it surprise you at all that he's used that phrase twice?
Well, I suppose we should refer back here, Tom, to that speech that the late Queen Elizabeth gave in 1947 when she said, "Be my life long or short, I shall be devoted to your service." He's obviously found a form of words, and it was, the form of words he had in his address yesterday they made from Buckingham Palace was for the duration of the time or the remaining time that God grants me. And again, I think it's an acknowledgement here that this is he's the oldest ever king or oldest ever monarch to reach the throne at age 73. We're talking about a different kind of reign, and of course we shouldn't be looking ahead to the length of it at this very early stage, Tom, but it is an acknowledgement that we have a 73-year-old monarch, and a reminder of the difference of when this Accession Council last sat. The new monarch then was just 25 years old. In fact, she wasn't even there for part one of the Accession Council because famously she was in Kenya. So I think a reminder once again of the difference, of the changing of reigns, the changing of eras that we're experiencing in 2022 compared to the one the country last experienced in 1952.
And yes, sir.
Closing the door on abdication.
Okay, that's interesting.
Because it means that he intends to go for the whole period of his natural life.
Okay, I would not have read that. That was what you read into that.
But that's what I read into that. And that shuts the door, as I say, on the notion that he might be open to abdication as he ages.
One of the things, and I may be wrong about this, but I've always understood that one of the reasons why no monarch ever wants to abdicate is because of the common law principle, because an abdication would require Parliament to get involved. Is that right?
That's absolutely right.
And no monarch wants that because then there are a whole load of other questions.
Well, it's a conflict with the hereditary principle.
Yeah, and the basic simplicity of the common law principle, I guess. Chris, can I just bring you in on one other thing? Because Anna mentioned that the new king seemed to sort of, say, are we done under his breath, quite understandably, at the end. And it's just a reminder that things crowd in very, very fast. For the country, it's been a massive period of sadness, of adjustment, of mourning as we get used to the idea that the Queen is no longer with us. But for the king, he's got all of that, suddenly having days, full of stuff he has to do, and he's just lost his mother.
Yeah, and actually I'm struck by the speed with which everything is happening as well. Of course, the accession councils was always scheduled to happen the day after the death of the sovereign. It's slightly delayed, of course, because of the announcement on Thursday evening. But, just the announcement last night that Prince William will become the Prince of Wales, there's a lot of speed happening very, very quickly. And I think that's, and we won't obviously have a date for the coronation for some time, but I can tell you this, Tom, it's not going to be 18 months after the accession as it was for the late Queen. And the other point we should pick out there is that we've had confirmation that the day of the funeral, although we don't know the date of it, but we know that the day of the funeral will be a public holiday. That was announced at the end of the part 2 of the accession council there in all 4 nations of the United Kingdom. That's a question I have to say I've been getting a lot from people. Will the Queen's funeral day be a public holiday? We now have had that confirmation that it will be. What day it's going to happen, we're likely to get that later today.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much for now. Well, let's return to just outside St James's Palaces, the scenes you're witnessing on your screens, and Paul Brand is there. Paul, we should explain, this is the moment when previous generations would find out they had a new monarch, right? This was before social media, before news media, before any of that. This is how you learned you had a new king or queen.
That's right, Tom, and you can see people in the crowd here all holding their phones aloft. They all want to capture this moment, but this was the pre-mobile phone news flash, if you like. This was the moment that the news would be announced to people who had absolutely no idea centuries ago that there was a new monarch, because of course there was no television, there wasn't even newspapers in the day when this proclamation ceremony first began. So this really is the word of mouth moment where the nation would be told that the king had ascended the throne. And in just a few minutes time, at 11 o'clock, we expect the heralds to walk out onto the balcony here at St James's Palace. There will be a fanfare, and then the proclamation will be read aloud to the public this time. Just a few hundred members of the public have been allowed through for security reasons. Of course, we've got former prime ministers here, we've got archbishops of Canterbury and York, all sorts of dignitaries, not least of all, of course, the king himself. So security is tight here, just a few hundred members of the public, lucky enough to be in Friary Court here to watch events on the balcony. And just off to my side is the slightly awkward political chemistry that you were watching in the room earlier, continuing out here onto the pavements. We've got cabinet members who were sacked on Tuesday chatting to cabinet members who were appointed on Tuesday. We've seen Boris Johnson just depart now. He seems to have left the proceedings for now. We've seen the great and good of political past and present as well. You mentioned some of them earlier. I've seen Peter Mandelson here today, and Nick Clegg, Michael Howard. So really, all sorts of figures from the past 30 years. The First Minister of Wales just filed past me too. So they are now joining the crowds essentially and standing outside and watching this moment when they will walk out onto that balcony for the first time in 70 years, and we will all enjoy the moment, the only moment that's ever been witnessed in centuries gone by, which is that proclamation, the Garter King of Arms, reading that proclamation, standing next to the heralds.
Well, Paul, it's an intriguing mix, isn't it, really, of the future and the past. You know, I felt like what we were witnessing in there, in those rooms, was the sort of ghosts of politics past. Obviously, some people, you know, Nick Clegg was so familiar as Deputy Prime Minister in the coalition. We actually haven't seen him very much recently. Peter Mandelson, as you say, Gordon Brown's Deputy Prime Minister, a Cabinet Minister under Blair before that. We haven't seen him very much in public life either. All these Prime Ministers chatting to each other, some of them quite animatedly, some quite surprising combinations. You know, Gordon Brown and Boris Johnson appearing to have a very animated and amused discussion, and one can only speculate what about. So it's a huge juxtaposition here, this sort of enormously sad moment for the country on one sense, but seeing a new king is just absolutely intriguing, watching the whole historical process play out and seeing it kind of take place amidst so much of the kind of past of public life being surrounding it. It's been extraordinary.
Yeah, and Tom, I found it quite interesting because it gives you a really rare insight into that constitutional interaction between monarchy and Parliament. That's not something we often see. Of course, at state openings of Parliament, we see the pomp and ceremony, but we very rarely hear those power dynamics between the two parts of our state, the two parts of our constitution. And I found it interesting watching Penny Mordaunt read that list of actions and to hear the King say agree as she was outlining what will be done in his name. A huge day for her, of course. She is the first woman actually to take part in that proclamation ceremony as Lord President of the Accession Council, to be announcing there the new king. No woman has ever done that in history before. Of course, the last time it was done was 70 years ago. There were very few women in Parliament at that point. So a huge responsibility for her. But now, really, this is the moment for the crowds here outside St James's Palace. This is their moment to enjoy the very public proclamation that will take place any moment now on this balcony.
Well, here we are. We are witnessing the final moments as they file out, ready to make this proclamation, as we've been discussing already this morning. In centuries gone by, this would have been the moment that the country learned, pre-social media, pre-news media, pre-every other kind of media, this was how you learned that you had a new monarch.
1 minute. Seconds.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to his mercy our late sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of